Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Steve Down and this is my guitar. If you're just joining us, we are in a study looking at John Scofield and Pat Metheny's The Red One from the Blue Note album, I Can See Your House From Here. This is lesson 5. We've already looked at the head, all of Scofield's solo and the first part of Metheny's solo, so make sure you go back over those if you want to learn the entire tune. This week we're going to be finishing off Metheny's solo, and then next week we're going to be finishing off the entire tune by going back through the head. So in this week's lesson, we're going to be looking at Metheny's use of timing or rhythmic displacement, his pentatonic shapes that he uses, some of the diatonic and non-diatonic arpeggios that he puts into his solo, a little bit of chromaticism, and then finally some good old-fashioned rock and roll and blues vocabulary. If you want to support me and you want to get the benefit of the full transcription, the backing track which I created especially for this lesson series, and all of the exercises that you see on screen, then head over to my Patreon page. The link is on the screen here. If you enjoyed the lesson and you got all you need from this video and you still want to support me, then you can buy me a coffee. The link is below. But also don't forget to hit the subscribe and the like button as well, and drop me a comment if you've got a question or you want to correct me on something. Before we jump into bars 1 to 4, I just want to say a big thanks to all of my patrons. We've got some new ones this week, so a big shout out to Matthew, Alex, Cassidy, and Laurent. I think I'm pronouncing your name right. Let me know if I'm not. Thanks so much for your support, guys, and do let me know if there's anything that you want me to cover in the future on this channel. So let's jump into bars 1 to 4. So in the first bar, we're using something called displacement. And here it's rhythmic displacement. And basically what it is where we take a phrase and we start it on a different position in the bar, so on a different beat. So Metheny's starting the phrase, this phrase, on the first beat, and then he's starting it on the 4th beat. So what he's actually doing is he's created a phrase that is actually in 3/4 because it spans 3 beats. And then he repeats it without a gap whilst we are in 4/4. So what we get is a displaced sound that is rhythmically tense. So he can use something as simple as the minor pentatonic scale and make it sound rhythmically out sounding without having to use an outside scale. He can just use displacement. And this is something you can use in your playing. To get started, try it on one note. So here's an example of a phrase on one note that is in 3/4. And then if we pop that into 4/4, making sure that you're accenting on beat 1 of the phrase each time. And you'll see there that the accents for each phrase fall on beat 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the first bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And then in the next bar, the next sequence starts on beat 3. So going from the beginning again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So eventually, after 3 complete bars, on the 4th bar, it resolves itself. Now, Metheny doesn't use the whole 3 bars and resolve on the 4th bar. He actually jumps off after 1.5 sequences, but it's still a cool little device to use in the solo, and you don't have to complete it to make your solo sound a little bit rhythmically tense. So you could just use a little bit of what Metheny's doing. So for the remainder of the 4-bar phrase, remember that he's phrasing in 4 bars just like he did in the last go round of the sequence, and also just like Scofield did. For the remainder of this 4-bar phrase, he's using minor pentatonic with a little bit of natural minor in there as well. He's using the 6th note from the natural minor in there to make it sound a little bit more interesting. And the way that he's approaching it is by using it laterally. So make sure you know the minor pentatonic scale going up the neck of the guitar on each string. In the previous lesson, we looked at the B minor pentatonic scale on every single string of the guitar. So head over to that video if you want to learn that technique. The other thing to note here is that Metheny's legato is really specific, especially with something like this. it's not just some kind of melismatic little thing that just kind of came out of his head. It's very, very well executed and intentional. So just make sure that when you're doing your legato phrases on there, that you're being really, really specific with which note you're going to. So think possibly just a little bit ahead of time, which note am I going to head towards, and am I going to slide? Am I going to hammer on? Am I going to bend? Just make sure you plan ever so slightly ahead. And also make sure that you practice legato exercises as well. So take your minor pentatonic scale and practice using legato techniques between each note. So sliding. And also hammer-ons. And then do that across every single string, just to make sure that you've got that technique down in order to be able to use it in your improvisation. Okay, let's move on to the next 4 bars. So here we've got some more displacement being used, and this particular idea that he's using where it's the same note, it's not even an octave, it's the same note, so it's the B that is on the 2nd string and the B that's also on the 3rd string. Same frequency, same range, it's in the same octave, it's just on 2 different strings, so you get a slightly different texture to the note. But this is something that Chuck Berry used in Johnny Be Good. And something that is classic blues and rock and roll vocabulary. And this is definitely something that, you know, Metheny would have picked up from his youth learning guitar. And he's just showing his blues vocabulary in here. And I think this is a really good example of, you know, why we don't need to overcomplicate things all the time. Even if you are a jazz player, you don't have to play jazz scales and jazz techniques all of the time. You can just use the minor pentatonic and use it really interestingly here. And the way that he makes it really interesting here is again with that displacement idea. So here we've got note groupings of 3 semiquavers. So you've got a semiquaver rest followed by 2 semiquaver notes on B. And so you'll see there is a rest of a semiquaver followed by 2 notes. And this gets repeated 4 times in there. And because of the fact that the note grouping is 3, again, it's creating this 3/4 feel. So again, we could see it not in 3/4 this time, but we can actually see that it's a time signature of 3/16. Now, I don't think Metheny would have been thinking like that as he was playing. I remember going to a lecture with Metheny and someone asked about which scale he was using over a specific point in Brightside Life, and he said, I don't think in scales, I think in notes. So he just thinks in 12 notes. Now that is a very high place that we can all aim to get to musically, but just remember that you do have to start a little bit lower down with the basics first in order to be able to get there. There's no use in kind of starting off like that. You have to kind of learn some of the rules and then learn to break them, as Miles Davis said. But this just goes to show with Metheny that he's not always thinking really, really technical. He's just using his ear. But for this purposes here, we could say that, you know, it's 3/4 because we're grouping in 3s. So you could think of different ways that you could group in 3s and put that over the top of your bar of 4/4. And that will create something that is rhythmically tense, which you can then resolve just like he does. So he resolves it there with that. So the next part in this 4-bar phrase, he's using a little bit of the natural minor again, but mixing it in with the minor pentatonic. So again, like I said in the last lesson, it's a really good idea to make sure that you know your minor pentatonic really, really well, but also your natural minor really, really well, and then you can mix them in together. Because remember, the natural minor scale contains all of the notes on the minor pentatonic, but also 2 extra notes, the C sharp and the G. So if you mix the 2 together, the 2 scales together, then you're going to get something that sounds really interesting. If you want to learn those scales, all of the positions of the minor pentatonic scale, both laterally and also vertically, go back to the last lesson. Also in the last lesson, I put in there the position that Metheny uses for the natural minor scale. Now moving on to the last two bars. In the last two bars we've got something called diatonic and non-diatonic arpeggios. The first diatonic arpeggio that he uses is a D major arpeggio, which is this. Now, the way that I know that this is a diatonic arpeggio is because the arpeggio of D is contained within the key of B minor, and the relative major is D on there. These are the chords, and obviously the arpeggios that come from those chords, that are contained within the B natural minor scale and its relative major, the D major scale. And so we have free rein to use any of those arpeggios and superimpose those over the top of the B minor. And Metheny's just selected one, so he's just selected the D and he's added that over the top of it. And so he's moved away from the minor pentatonic and used a diatonic arpeggio over the top of it. The next thing he does is he selects a non-diatonic arpeggio, which is the arpeggio of E major. Now, as we just saw with our run-up of the diatonic chords there, E major wasn't there, it was an E minor that was there. So that's how we know that it's a non-diatonic chord. And it's actually a chord, E major is a chord that is borrowed from the B melodic minor scale, which is this scale. And the chords that are derived from that scale when you harmonise them, and obviously the arpeggios that will come off of that, are these chords. And so you can see there is an E7 there, okay? So Metheny has selected that. He's chosen just to do E rather than E7, so he's just simplified it a little bit, but he's still including that in there. Now we'll also note that this chord is actually on the chart for the head as well, so it's a chord that Metheny implied and is now referencing in his solo. Scofield didn't do that, and Metheny actually didn't do it in his first go-round of the chorus as well. He's just choosing to do it here. So this is another little lesson in being able to structure your solos. Try not to use all of your good stuff in the first chorus. Metheny's saving a few little bits for later on. After those two arpeggios, those two paired arpeggios, he has a little bit of a chromatic descent right from the top. Now this is quite tricky here. What he's doing, I'm using all four fingers for this, so my fourth finger up on the 19th fret and then descending. And then sliding back with my first finger from the 16th fret to the 15th fret. Really quickly. Then down onto the second string, 19th fret, 19, 18, 17 there, which is the F sharp, F natural, and E. And then jumping back down to the 12th position before going into the B section. So just be really careful about your fingering there. You might want to practice that line. Nice and slow, because it is all over the place. Okay, let's move on to the B section. Okay, so for these four bars, Metheny's approaching it again, just like he did in the last one, and also just like Scofield did with the E Mixolydian scale. The chord underneath is E7, which would imply a dominant kind of sound needs to be used. So that's why they've both selected the E Mixolydian scale. Now, what Metheny's doing here is something that he did in the head. He's using underneath it a drone of an open E, and then he's using the E Mixolydian scale along the B string, which is this. So with the patch that I'm using, the HX Stomp patch, I'm not able to play polyphonically, so I'm not able to play two notes at the same time without it sounding really super weird. It's just, unfortunately, the software that is on the HX Stomp for the synth doesn't allow you to be able to do that. So what I've done is I've cheated slightly and I've overdubbed this drone of E underneath it. Okay, so if you're recording it yourself and you want to get that sound and use the patch that I've included over on the Patreon channel, by the way, all you need to do is just set up another input and just play the same rhythm just using the open E. That's all I did on there. And I think it sounds pretty close. Obviously, you don't get the same kind of sonority that you would playing two notes and kind of strumming them, so you don't get that kind of strum sound, but it still allows you to get pretty close. Metheny's using a little bit of legato between some of the notes of the Mixolydian scale. So there, and also. So just make sure that you can play the Mixolydian going up, sliding along. It's a fairly easy exercise. Okay, it sounds pretty cool, pretty Indian-y actually. The other thing Metheny does is towards the end, again, unlike Scofield, he references the C major 7 chord and he gives it a Lydian sound by adding in an F sharp, which is a sharp 4. And he does exactly the same approach as that he did with the E Mixolydian scale, where he's got this drone of E, which in this case, over the top of the C chord, is going to be the third of the C. And then on the second string, he's playing his melody line laterally up the neck. So that's this. And yeah, it's a pretty cool approach. Just be really super careful of those triplets right at the end of this particular passage, because it does kind of, again, just like he did last time, it skews the time a little bit, and you could get a bit off kilter and then come back in at the wrong point. I know I did that a few times when I was recording this. So the last 4 bars of Metheny's solo, he's playing around with the time again. It's not really rhythmic displacement here, but he's just giving these 2 notes the different treatment each time. So the first time he's playing it with quavers and then with semiquavers, and then he's adding rests in between the semiquavers. So he's just, reusing his material and getting the most mileage out of his material. So again, that's something we can do in our solos as well. Just 2 notes and then getting as much mileage as possible by varying the subdivisions. And then he steps up everything a notch, but with some legato in sextuplets. So just be really careful again with that, with your picking. I'm using alternate picking for that last bit. So down, 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 up, down, there at the end. And then he finishes it in very much the same way that he kind of finished the last one. So again, he's got, like just in the last one, like I said last time, he's got that kind of 5-1 kind of sound. Okay, so I mean, there wasn't a great deal of stuff in there. Mostly it was kind of just rhythmic things in there. So Metheny's just demonstrating, like a master, how you can use simple scales, simple vocabulary, so blues vocabulary and simple scales like the minor pentatonic and the natural minor and the Mixolydian, so nothing too out there. And he's demonstrating that you can use all of that stuff and still make it sound super interesting and sophisticated by varying the rhythm. So we've got that displacement idea running all the way throughout, and that's probably something that he just kind of set out to do. Sometimes soloists, I include myself in this, we'll set ourselves kind of like a theme for a head. So we might think, oh, okay, we're going to play really out for this chorus, or we're going to play really in for this chorus, or we're going to use arpeggios, or we're going to use rhythmic displacement. There's many, obviously, different things that you can do, but quite often we'll think in a theme for a chorus. So I think that's what Metheny might have done. Obviously, I don't know, it's just speculation, but just going off of my interpretation of the piece, that kind of seems like what he's doing. So just a few roundup things from this study. I think the things that you definitely need to do in order to be able to tackle this is to make sure that you know your minor pentatonic all along the fretboard. So that means laterally and vertically. So learn those 5 classic positions and then also learn it laterally along each string. So go back to lesson 4 to check that stuff out. And then to add a bit of interest for the A section, then you can use things like the natural minor scale and add in, like Metheny does and also like Scofield does, add in that note of G on there because it just adds in something a little bit more spicy. The other thing is to make sure that your legato is all sorted out as well and that you're nice and accurate with that. For the B section, make sure you know your E Mixolydian scale and laterally if you want to get a similar sound to what Scofield and Metheny did. And then the last thing is just to make sure that if you want to get some interest into your solo, use some displacement ideas just like they do. As I say all the time, learn this piece all the way through, note for note, but then take the concepts and extrapolate them out into your own improvisational explorations, just so that you don't end up just using it as a party piece. So this is where you can get really creative and you can actually learn something from this that you can use creatively. So good luck with all of that. Next week I'm going to be posting the entirety of the piece with me playing everything. So I'll finish it off by doing the head and playing through the whole piece as well. I'll make sure that all of the tab is on there as well so that you can go through that. And I'll post a backing track up on Patreon as well. Big thanks to Jamie Sefton and Joe Harris for their input on the backing track. And as always, happy practicing and I'll see you on the next one.